Hello, and welcome to the Wonder Women series of the Maker Mom podcast. My name is Katie Freeman, and I am your host. Every week, I bring you interviews with two female or non-binary makers of all sorts, some of them moms, some of them not. This week's guest is Sami of Go Sami Lee. Sami is also the social media expert behind the scenes at Avid CNC. I had a great time chatting with Sami. I had the opportunity to meet her briefly when I was at WorkbenchCon earlier in the year, and I really enjoyed this opportunity getting to chat with Sami, and we talk about quite a few different important things that are not only impacting the makerspace but also the world. So I think you're really going to enjoy what we cover here. But before we get into the interview, I want to give a big shout out and thanks to the patrons over on Patreon. So thank you so much, Lauren of Rasp and File Designs, Sven, Dwarf Sized Workshop, Rachel, Moody Makes, Bonnie, Toolmom Bonnie, toolmomstore.com, Laura, Oakley Soap Company, Mary Lou, Made by Mary Lou, Amy, Bison Valley Carving, Dan and Kelly Reclaim Living Store, Brandy Studio Obey, Kathy One Girl and Her Tools, Ellen Little Bear Furniture, and Ethan Carter Designs. Thank you all so very much for your ongoing continued support of the podcast. You are what helps make it possible for me to produce 2 episodes a week, so thank you so very, very much. Now make sure you stick around to the end of the episode so you can find out how you can follow along with Sami. Plus, you can find out how you can help support the podcast as well. All right, with no further ado, this is Sami.
No, I obviously listen, and I love the podcast and everything. So thanks. I'm thrilled. So thanks for having me,
Yeah, absolutely. So. Well, then since you do listen, then we can get started, and I always have guests introduce themselves. So I'm going to let you do that.
Okay. All right.
Go for it.
Hi, I'm Sami, and I am a designer, a maker, and I do primarily work with CNC machines. So I love digital fabrication and robots. I studied sculpture and have kind of worked my way into different fabrication facets in the fabrication world. I live in Portland, Oregon, in the Pacific Northwest, and I currently work for Avid CNC, making content and educational resources for folks who want to learn about CNC and making things.
Awesome. And I'm so looking forward to get diving into all of that. But I do want to chat a bit about your childhood. Where'd you grow up? What kind of things were you interested in as a kiddo?
Yeah. So I'm originally from the Silicon Valley, and I grew up in if anybody has an iPhone and wonders where Cupertino is, where your phone automatically defaults to the weather in Cupertino, that's where I'm from. It is, I think it definitely is interesting looking back now how that has had some impact on where my career is now, because I was kind of rebellious against this upbringing, a very strong academic upbringing, which I really am so grateful for. And, I am so glad that I had that opportunity. But I was so artistic and I just loved making things, and I just felt so different. I didn't really feel like I fit in. Looking now as I get to do things and make things, but I also use computers and robots to do it. So it's kind of funny how that kind of loops back, really. But I was a Girl Scout. That was kind of some of my first forms of making. I remember, aside from crafts and sewing and stuff, I really loved lashing and tying knots and building forts and tree beds and that kind of thing. And that's kind of really where I discovered building things and not just like making little, you know, crafts. Yeah.
That's my furry co-host. If you can hear him through the mic, I don't know.
You'll definitely might get a visit from mine too. He has been very talkative today. So
okay. Yeah. We have brother and sister, 6-month-old kittens. I tell everybody there are quarantine babies. And it's really the kids finally broke us down. And when we were all stuck at home, that's really what we ended up getting. So yeah, they come in and out. And probably my luck, I have packages being delivered today and my dog is out in the living room. So there's a strong chance that there will be some barking going on as well. So I want to kind of clarify, maybe even for my own self. So like Silicon Valley versus San Francisco, are they separate? Yeah. Are they the same?
That's a really good question. In terms of culture, they're very different. But in terms of kind of how it functions as a larger economy, I think it's really overlapping because all those towns really blend into each other. So I'll just list a couple, and you might have heard of some, like Mountain View, Palo Alto, you know, that's like where Stanford is, and Facebook and, you know, Apple. So all of those kind of intersect, and then they all have buildings and locations all over. And, you know, you have the startup culture and, but in terms of like what the landscape looks like, of course, San Francisco is that classic, you know, what you picture. And Silicon Valley, San Jose is really more suburb and less city, but it still has, you know, there has a lot more room for larger buildings and that sort of thing for employees and whatever. But yeah, so that's a good question. I think they are very much one and the same, but there are different facets of that, right?
Yeah, I had, like with my job, I've been to the San Jose area a couple of times. And
it's fine.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
At the time when I went there, I was also living in California. So I lived in the Oceanside, California area, which is northern San Diego County for people who are listening that don't know where that's at. And so like I was used to that kind of like, because Oceanside is essentially, you know, it all runs together. There's no break, you know, and people, like there's no like sprawling like coastline. It's pretty much packed all the way up the coast. But it all runs into each other. So to me, like San Jose was very much just like Oceanside or whatever. It's just like a very sprawling, what probably started as like a bedroom community for like the larger city has grown into its own community.
Right. And San Jose is huge. It's a really big, it's a pretty big city considering, and has a pretty large population. And even then within San Jose, I was from West San Jose, which is like, you could just tell like how the lines are drawn when you actually look at the map, and kind of like how there is some strategy there, which we won't get too into, but it's very different. Parts of San Jose look really different. So, you know, it really is, you do get a lot of variation there.
Yeah. I mean, so partially why I asked this question is totally like, you know, just for me sake wise, is me being a person, a queer person growing up in the Midwest, like I idolized like San Francisco, which then became like idolized like California as a whole of like this mecca, right? That I could move to and be open and free and like no discrimination and wow, it's amazing. And then I moved, you know, with my wife to Oceanside, California, and found very quickly that pretty much
Yeah.
outside of like the like city centers, it is not very welcoming to members of the
Right,
queer
right.
community.
California is not San Francisco and
No,
LA. Like,
no.
I think that's the interesting thing because, and, you know, just to unpack this, right? I think it's funny because it's just such a bubble. And
Mm-hmm.
growing up in that bubble, grew up, I will acknowledge, in a very, you know, upper middle class neighborhood. My parents happened to buy the right house in the right neighborhood before dot-com boom,
Mm-hmm.
and it worked out for them. And we're so fortunate to have that. Um, and grew up in a very diverse neighborhood. My K through 12 is 90% Asian,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm quarter Chinese, and so I have like a very diverse family. And I kind of just grew up really believing that this was, you know, the way it was everywhere, and
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't right include out 30 minutes outside, you know, when you drive any direction away from your big city. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's definitely a big wake up call. I moved to Savannah, Georgia for college. And, you know, it's funny because I analyze these kinds of responses when I decided to go to art school, and all my peers decided to go to Stanford or Harvard or Berkeley or whatever, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and they're like, well, you're going to Georgia, you know, just like kind of all the responses was getting was so judgmental.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, that was, you know, those 4 years were transformative and really opened my eyes to how, you know, it felt like going to a different country, really,
Mm-hmm.
and not just a different state. And it was so, I think, important in my young mind development. You know, I feel like a lot of young folks should get to be exposed to different places. And you go to Georgia and there's like preconceptions about California and what that means.
Yeah.
Um, and, you know, as like for queer folks too. And it wasn't all, you know, right, sunshines and rainbows, you know, like my sibling is non-binary and came out as gay in high school. And, you know, did the Queers and Allies Club, you know, but their posters would get torn down on the high school campus, even though there's like this facade of being totally open and in a liberal state. You
Mm-hmm.
know, it just isn't always that way. And but we're, you know, fortunate our family is so open, and you know, that we couldn't have, you know, hope for a better acceptance for Brina's transitions. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but it's definitely not exactly what you think is going to be, and kind of like the Hollywood posters.
Right.
So
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, that was like actually, you know, a conversation that took up a lot of time, probably
mm-hmm.
more than it should have, with my wife and I after we moved there. And like,
Yeah.
especially um, Oceanside specifically has Camp Pendleton in it, and I don't want to like turn off anybody who's listening who's in the military, but let's just say there were definitely
Right.
moments where we would be walking together, and not even holding hands, just walking together, and we felt not safe. You know, we
Yeah.
felt definitely like, okay, we need to be very careful
Right.
in this situation. And we talked a lot about it being just kind of maybe a disappointment to a degree, just
Mm-hmm.
because like it's, you build up a place in your head of thinking like, well, maybe there is some place out there that we can be wholly ourselves and like
Yeah.
not judged in any way for that.
Right.
and
Right.
and then
Right.
it didn't exist, and it was just kind of like,
Yeah.
well, that's a letdown. You know.
Yeah. I seriously is. I think that's a funny conversation. Not funny. It's a conversation we need to have, especially now where, you know, folks are like, well, I guess I'm moving to Canada. Like, okay, we can joke about this, but you can't, there's no place for us to go
Mm-hmm.
that where we can totally feel 100% safe as queer people or as women, or,
Mm-hmm.
you know, if you're Black or brown, like there's not really a perfect place to go to. It
Mm-hmm.
doesn't exist. So you have to make it, and you have to make that change. I know it's not going to happen overnight. We're going to acknowledge that, and it's not going to happen just because now we're all of a sudden, white folks are talking about it, or straight folks are talking about it. It's not magic. It's just, we got, just because you know about it now, it's not gonna, right. But we do, what I've been trying to focus on is, Portland, everyone I'm sure has heard in the news what is going here with protests and, that sort of thing. We need to, that is so important to show up for that. I think it's also, if we don't show up in our own communities, our maker world here, this is our career, this is our passion. If we don't show up for, our friends here in the community that have traditionally not had access to the resources that, a lot of, I love our YouTuber dudes. You're great. You're doing a good job, but you need to share that mic and lift folks up and make sure that, Black women and queer women and any women get access to these resources, and that's kind of like been a passion that I've been trying to figure out how to divert resources and whether it's on my weekends. I've just finished, I'm 95% done with some planter boxes I'm building for a local Black owned or BIPOC queer art gallery here in Portland. So whether it's you're volunteering your time or you're helping someone with some design files or making a sign for their business, whatever it is, we need to use the skills, the superpowers that we have, which is making, and then, try to show up. Right.
Yep. Hey makers, do you know Lauren of Rasp and File Designs? Well, if you don't, you should definitely go check out her work. You can find her on Instagram, Rasp File Designs. Lauren is making all kinds of cool furniture and home decor pieces out of live edge hardwoods and metal bases. That's not all she does though, so you should really go check her out and see what she's up to, especially as holiday seasons are coming up. And I know all of us makers really enjoy making our own Christmas presents, but perhaps you're running out of time, so you want to maybe go check out Lauren. She's in the DC area, so especially those who are close location-wise to her. So go ahead, go check her out at Rasp File Designs on Instagram, and let's get back to the episode. And I know I've taken us down a rabbit hole with this.
Oh, please. I could talk about it all day, and that's the thing. It's like, I think it's funny when people say, F 2020, we don't need to, I wish this never happened. It's like, this is exactly what had to happen. We have to talk about this. And it's like, finally, we're, obviously it's there's a lot of tragedies that come right with the pandemic, but it's also the catalyst for us to, get to bring these conversations forward and actually make the progress that it's been put off for too long, so.
Yeah, exactly. I do want to so you talked about having that experience going from, Silicon Valley and then moving to Georgia to go to school. First, I mean, what did you go to school for? And what were some of, I guess, the things that you felt were really kind of changed your trajectory?
Yeah. So I originally, went for, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to major in. I went to the Savannah College of Art and Design, and they had over 50 majors and minors. So they had definitely had the largest selection in terms of getting to explore. I didn't have to decide right there and then. There was really transformative moment. You take foundations classes, a little bit of everything. And I took a 3D foundations class, and Professor Scott, I will make a shout out because he's just completely changed the trajectory of my entire career. And, I had a lot of wonderful mentors there. And all the sculpture professors in particular really kind of gave me the outlet that I needed where I could work on learning techniques on how to do things, but also exploring concept and reason. But Prof. Scott in particular, like I was sitting on the front steps of the sculpture building, which was this little kind of like rundown brick building that is by the railroad tracks. And, obviously not as much money went into that as it did into the industrial design shop. We won't have to get into that too much, but he saw me on the steps of my like foundations project, and he points to me and he's like, "You're going to take my sculpture 2 class at next quarter. Sign up for it." And he also got me into the digital fabrication sculpture classes. So I took that and the advanced digital fabrication class, and that completely, has ignited this light in me, and my interest in building things and in making things and utilizing the technologies that we have access to, but still having the hands-on processes of I could, use a hand plane when I'm going to finish, or a chisel when I want to, but I can also leverage the, digital fabrication in order to really help me get to where I want to go. So Savannah was, a really, I think, great, wonderful time in my life where I got to explore and make things and live in a different world. And the sculpture department really is kind of where I found my passion. I think that looking back, I kind of wish I had also studied furniture design, but I can also create the opportunity for myself now and giving myself my own assignments to do that. So.
So when you were getting into, sculptural design, because I've had also on here, on the podcast, I've had, a few people who majored in sculpture, 3D sculpture, like Ellen of Little Bear Furniture. She did sculptural as her major as well. But she got into furniture with it. So like, where did, when you were in school, was it more, I don't know necessarily how to say, like more just artistic expression, or like, did you end up kind of leaning in towards maybe like, art with some functionality to it?
Right. I didn't really get to explore functionality as much in that time. I think that kind of came later when I started doing fabrication, getting jobs in fab shops, working more with wood and material and making things that had function, like signs or restaurant build outs or tap handles, when I got into that. So I did get to kind of focus on learning materials and processes, and focus on form and concept then, and then later on it kind of expanded to what I was. I wish I had more to, it's like you always kind of want a little bit more time to explore that. But it was, I did a lot of installation art as well. So experiences, which I think is kind of something I'm still really interested in now that I kind of look at interior architecture and furniture, objects you interact with all the time,
Yeah. How did you get into fabrication? And like, I mean, because it seems like an interesting jump, right? Art to fabrication.
Well, I always say sculpture saved my life, because honestly, I was originally going to be study painting, and I did study painting, but my focus ended up being in sculpture. And I owe every job I've had to that, focus, because I could actually make a thing, So I moved to Portland. I got a job. My first job was a ceramic tile company, pressing tiles and like 3-dimensional tiles. So I never really worked in ceramics before. So worked with 15-ton ram press machines and extruders and kilns. I moved on to I got a job as a CNC technician at a local makerspace, and worked in a fabrication team with a lot of breweries and local coffee shops, right? As I was talking about the um, tap handles and
Mm-hmm.
signs and that sort of thing. So that kind of was the path there. And I've always been passionate about teaching. So education and making is really kind of the intersection of the things that I'm passionate about. And I had, grown up in high school, coached soccer team, like kids soccer. And I was in college, founded the painting club and was president of that and president of the sculpture club. So I really like to lead and to help curate shows. So I also curated art shows at the makerspace. I found a space that I could put shows together and
Mm-hmm.
use that as a platform to try to lift folks up. I always kind of really struggled with making my own work, my own art, and saying what I have to say is important. I was always kind of better at lifting other people up and saying, here, I'm really good at coordinating events and kind of seeing talent and just trying to help all of that fall away for you, where you don't have to really worry about putting that together. I can organize and curate this experience with your work, and helping them achieve that was always something I really was passionate about. And then I ended up teaching CNC and woodworking at the makerspace later on. As I kind of grew in my role, I became the digital fabrication project manager. And then I later managed the fabrication team, which was a team of 10 folks, only 2 women. And I was like the second youngest, which is definitely a challenging place to be in when you're, your woodshop bros.
Yeah.
I say that with all the love in my heart.
Yes.
You can, it's funny, to get, really to fit in, you get really good at the sup, bruh,
Yeah.
entrance. And I do really appreciate that time in my life. It was definitely challenging too, because I had to become a lot tougher in an environment. And, while some of that really got to me and annoyed me when I was there at that time, from ages, 23 to 26, looking back now, it was definitely a time that made me stronger and better, and worked really hard, really long hours, practicing, learning CNC, and eventually teaching it. So, yeah.
So that team that you were leading there, which I think that's awesome that like a makerspace would have, like that kind of a fabrication team.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
But you're leading this team, you're leading this group. Like you said, you're the second youngest. Most of the people you're leading, I'm assuming, were all older than you and male.
Yeah.
Yeah,
definitely no chip on their shoulder at all. They were totally cool with it. Yeah. They were like, yes, through a party. No.
I mean, were they coming to the table like, I really don't want this to come off bad, but were they coming to the table with more experience, like more CNC experience, more woodworking experience?
I definitely had the most CNC experience of all of them. In terms of years in a shop, perhaps, but in terms of, sharpening your stick and getting really good at things like leading a team and being organized and scheduling and interacting with clients, that was something I had, didn't even realize I was working on those skills. Like when you, for example, coaching soccer, I'm interacting with kids. I'm also interacting with their parents. I'm also like helping coordinate these big events, that was also related to the league, and that was just starting at age 14, and then working through that and organizing groups and curating shows. Like there's a lot of coordination and relationships you have to build and maintain. So I think I was particularly, I will say it was not easy for me to get that final promotion where I got to manage the team. I honestly had to work 4 months longer, because one of the circumstance was that my boss was fired, the manager of the fab team, because he lost his temper, and we totally got through that. But that position was vacant. And I went to the general manager of the, after a couple days, I didn't just go try to sweep in, give it a week or something. Yeah. And I said, hey, I really think I'm the right person for this job. And here are all the reasons why I am the right person. I am the youngest, but I'm also been a project manager longer than anybody here who's still currently here. There is turnover in a fab shop. And I've been training all these project managers and the CNC technicians, and I think that I'm the right person for this job. And the disappointing thing, is sometimes women can make judgments on you too. And it's not just, you're not safe because you're, from making these statements, but she kind of gives me this very condescending, like pat on the shoulder, like, oh, but what do you think the team, just do this mind experiment with me for a second, with this pat on the shoulder, and says, what do you think the team, so basically, what do you think all these dudes, well, think of these two words in a leadership position, young and female, as if that had anything to do with whether or not I could do the job. And then, my response essentially was like, well, they should stand up and cheer because I am the right person for this job. And I, think I deserve it. If you don't think that, I understand. So for 3.5 months, they leave the position vacant and it's not going well. And then they gave me the promotion after 3.5 months of leaving it empty and telling me I couldn't do it because, oh gosh, what would the boys think about it? So but I did get the job and then I quit because I just wasn't, because they gave me the promotion without a raise and without, acknowledging that they obviously paid the two men who did the job before me way more, as it was the highest paid position at this place. And I'm not saying I needed to be paid the same amount because obviously they had more experience in certain aspects, but you don't just get to, the way it was handled wasn't appropriate. And I moved on and found a better positions, and then eventually found made the person, like, got to help make a perfect position where I'm so lucky now to get to work with Avid CNC, and they helped create this role for me that I get to do all these different faceted tasks where I get to teach and I get to write and I get to make film and I get to do research and development. I get to do collaboration projects with other makers. I get to kind of pull all these strings that I can see in the world and help build bridges and make connections between people that are out there. I see, okay, this person, needs this resource. I see that this company is really wanting to give, they just don't know how, and being able to help build those connections. So, while on the surface, I make YouTube videos and get to talk about robots all day, there's a lot of things that I like to do, which is like planting seeds and helping people and getting, STEM access to girls and to women who haven't had the opportunity to learn this, or anybody who's interested in it. Really, there are, I think this is a technology that can really help a small business, because I've done it myself, where I was the digital fabrication project manager and my profit margin would blow the custom boys out of the water every time. It's not because they weren't working just as hard, because they were working hard too. But when you have a tool like a CNC or a laser, you can really, if you leverage it in the right way, you can have added success. It's the employee that shows up every day, and it does, for better or worse, it does exactly what you tell it to. Right. So, yeah.
So I want to say, big kudos, and totally in a non-condescending way, for you to
thank you,
take the bull by the horns and kind of go in there and say, I'm the right person for this job. I want to follow that up with, how did you get to that point? Is it just like, that's you, that's your personality? do you have there been role models that have kind of
Yeah.
shown you to stand up for yourself in that way?
Yeah, definitely. I would definitely say my mom plays a big role. She has endless empathy and strength and presence. And her name's Rosie. Rosie Go. She is a go girl. And like me, never stop moving. You're really just constantly giving. She is a nurse at Stanford Hospital and manages the local or helps support the local soccer league, organizing volunteers. She's on all these different sports teams. She plays, uh, softball and tennis and golf and whatever. She does. It's insane. Her schedule is completely packed, but which is probably a hint of why I am the way I am. And I try to also channel my dad's inner chill, to kind of balance. But she definitely has this, she is very passionate about standing up for women in spaces that she didn't necessarily feel was fully accepted. I know that being a nurse is a very femme field, but she also is a referee, and she referees at least 4 soccer games a weekend. And that's, ages from like, I don't know, 10 to college. And women in refereeing, it's not very common, and you don't get treated the same,
Hey makers, today's episode is brought to you by Tool Mom and Company, or some of you know her as Tool Mom Bonnie. She has all kinds of tool-related merchandise of gifts and clothing for all ages and genders available at toolmomstore.com. I have 2 of the coffee mugs. One says Go Girl, and it has a circular saw with flames coming off the back, which is super sweet. And then the other one is the definition of a tool chick, which just makes you feel kind of badass when you're drinking out of it. So if you are in the market, especially as we're getting close to Christmas, for any tool-related merchandise, be that gifts or clothing, make sure you head on over to toolmomstore.com. And extra bonus, you can receive 20% off at checkout if you use the coupon code MAKERMOM. All right, let's jump back into the episode.
And she always really stood up for herself and for others. And I definitely think that she has had a big impact on why I am the way I am, the way I can stand up for myself. I guess I just try to lead with compassion and lead with kindness. If folks don't want to receive it, it's okay. I'm going to try to not let, and that was, a time with the fabrication team where like, okay, you don't want to receive that. Or I just also try to, in my communication style, accommodate others' communication style, which is sometimes you have to sacrifice the way you want to communicate in order to get people to meet you halfway, and in some cases, like in the fabrication team, to get people to do their job, the thing that they signed up to do, but I have to accommodate. So sometimes, I had a coworker who's a project manager. I'd sometimes get him to pitch an idea that was mine, because I know that the other guys are more likely to say, oh yeah, sure. Like, oh, that sounds cool because, this cool project manager, he presented it. And I'm okay with that because my idea got implemented, maybe not exactly in the way I wanted to, but if you can, I hope it doesn't come off as manipulative. It's more about how to, it's funny how I could have presented the same idea 2 to 3 weeks before, and it wasn't received in the same way. And to learning about how, I'm just trying to help and support. And, it's about training days, basically, was the idea. And it's like it's something that should be fundamental and just exist rather than being something I have to feel like I have to accommodate for, but it is kind of something, when you're communicating with somebody who works for you or somebody you work for or somebody you're collaborating with, you want to make sure that you have open communication channels. And I think that's something that I really like to focus on and make sure I'm being thoughtful of.
So I'm going to be honest. I cringe / my heart sank when you said, having to have a male
Mm-hmm.
coworker pitch the idea for you, because for one, that is, I think, something that almost every woman who is working can relate to.
Yeah.
Secondly, I've had a guest on not too long ago, Tanda, who transitioned, is male to female trans, and I asked that question about like being in the workplace and the experience of, it's an opportunity for me to say, okay, you had an experience as a male working in a workplace, and now you have the experience as a female, and talking to that, and just like how frustrated she could get now that like that's how it is. And it just, having these conversations, sometimes total honesty, it pisses me off that we women have to focus on that.
Right.
Like the amount of energy and work we have to put into just communicating an idea.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Versus the amount of energy a male coworker has to put in presenting that idea. And the thought process behind like, okay, I have to choose the right words, right tone of voice, right facial expressions, right body language, right moment. God forbid we talk to you in a moment where you're not in a space to hear it.
Not apologize for my presence. It's like, it's funny when you look at all these like very specific examples, like in retrospect, I started and I'm also fortunate to be able to have a name that is, it can be, gender neutral. So I started sending my emails as Sam instead of Sami. And it's insane the responses that how totally my interactions with my clients or new clients were a lot less questioning of my authority on a subject or,
level of knowledge.
Exactly. Like people were sending me, after 2 years of doing it, 101 videos on how to CNC cut something. And I'm like, if you don't think I'm capable of it, why are you even having me quote a job for you? If you don't think I can do it, why would you ask me to do this? There was one really wonderful moment when, you have all these emails coming in and different project managers are picking them up. And my male coworker, who is the project manager, also has a gender neutral name and responded to a message. And I also did as well. And I was like, oh, hey, like, can I help you with this project? And the client was like, no, it's fine. Like, she's got it. Like, I don't need your help, dude. And it was just like the best win to me ever. And I like jumped out of my seat because it was just so awesome that the client was just like, no, so-and-so, she's got it. Like, I don't need you. Okay. Like, and it was just awesome. But it's funny when you look at that and, I definitely know it's not ideal, but it is revealing, and it kind of shows, okay, well, what can I do now to make sure that this is something that, girls or trans folk don't necessarily, like, how can I make it a little bit easier for somebody who comes after me? So,
you're talking about getting in and getting to work with like Avid and having them kind of like respect you for like your knowledge and what you bring to the table and everything about who you are. And then talking about which, so Avid's a company, and in
Mm-hmm.
our space as makers, they're a brand. And so
Yeah, it is, right?
we're looking, if you are a maker and you want to get into um, content creation, then
Mm-hmm.
what you deal with is working with brands and trying to get brand sponsorship, and
Mm-hmm.
because that's how you make a living, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I want to circle back to, you talking about all these wonderful male YouTubers. And,
Right.
I met you in person at Workbench Con,
Mm-hmm.
which, has quite a few of the superstar male YouTubers there,
Yeah.
the female ones as well, but
Yeah.
definitely men still outnumber the women. Um, and given your spot in at, the organization with the company you're working for, like how do how does that make you feel, seeing like other brands and how they work with content creators versus like your brand and how you're working with content creators? um,
Mm-hmm.
I've had conversations on the podcast, about conferences like Workbench Con, which is part of it is about networking with our peers. Part of it is about learning, but part of it is about networking with brands and having the
Mm-hmm.
conversation about how many of those brands even seem approachable to a woman. Like just from
Yeah.
standing back at that 50-foot, level and looking at them and saying, who here can I actually go talk to and have them take me seriously if I'm not already somebody who has a recognizable name?
Right. Yeah.
Um,
That's a fair question. I think measuring folks by their follower count is an inherently broken system. It's not a fair start. And, when we look at the primary demographic that follows CNC related content, it's definitely, you have that same dichotomy of a much higher male base to female.
mhm.
But it's interesting because I don't think we should, right, pick people based solely on follower count. And while that's important for, the way, I will say, first of all, the way we collaborate with content creators is very different than I think a lot of brands. We don't have necessarily the affiliate program, and it's a lot more informal. It's more about trying to support what you're trying to accomplish. You have a mission and a narrative, and you're telling your own story. We will never dictate what kind of content that you make, you have to make a build video, you have to do this. That's not how we collaborate. We just want to be able to help support you in your
Mhm.
already directed mission. And I think that there is of course it'll be good for us to collaborate with uh, a woodworker, no matter their gender, if they are of a certain follower,
Right.
count. Of course, that's going to help our brand and our
Mhm.
representation. We also, I think, if you we don't have a lot of, we are a very alternative business model because we don't sell through stores, because we have that kind of, we want to pass the savings on to whoever is purchasing a machine, and we kind of have a different structure around that.
Mhm.
um, it's also a relatively small company, less than 30 employees, and a really small town called North Bend, which is, uh, if anyone's seen Twin Peaks, that's where it's filmed,
Yeah.
is in North Bend. It's got like one stoplight and the diner is there, it's insanely beautiful too. So we definitely handle things differently. And I understand, like, it's funny because Corey, my coworker, and I went to Workbench Con as just we attended it. We didn't have a booth or
Right.
anything. I was like, it was just an event I wanted to go to,
Right.
and meet some folks that I had been talking to on Instagram and messaging
Mhm.
with, and just to be like, just like have a beer with some awesome makers.
Right.
And it really did, for us too, was a very great opportunity to meet people I looked up to, like I wanted to meet Shar from the Wood Maven in person, and Alma. And I'm sure probably by the time this comes out, they'll have their machines. So they're both, we're getting the opportunity to collaborate with them and support their work. So they're both getting their CNC machines in their shop. Obviously, it's difficult for us to, it's not bottles of glue. It's big CNC machines.
Right.
So, but my passion and Avid CNC has been so supportive in helping direct this passion that I have about getting resources to women or girls who are in learning STEM, who are doing robotics or something. There's also, I'm hoping in the near future, next year, we can start supporting organizations that exist. So I don't believe that I am the person with the answers. I could pick and choose like some makers that I think are wonderful. But also I think it's important for us to just support existing organizations that are doing really good work. I have some really wonderful ideas of those groups. But getting machinery into places that are supporting women in the trades, or I think is definitely kind of the direction I'd like to help focus. And so we're definitely putting a lot of thought into that now, and we kind of have like a little board together that we're working on directing those decisions, because and it's kind of adjacent to our company, so it's not necessarily it's folks who are really tapped into the community, knowing what the community needs there. Yeah.
Do you see, and obviously I know that you individually are not, your company, but
right. I don't get to make all these decisions by myself. But
do you think you are, you're a small company, a small brand, people wise, do you see yourselves being able to influence some of these other brands? And I guess I'm speaking like, things I've brought up on the podcast before about either intentionally seeking out women, Black and brown people of color, people from the LGBTQ community. Like, I think that I firmly believe it is also on the responsibility of the brand to actually put some work into finding people within those communities. But also like beyond just like working with them, things like being at a show and all you have are white heterosexual men at your booth.
Yeah, I mean, that's maybe why, having a booth versus attending it, I can have a lot more nuance to kind of go have conversations. And it's funny to look back on some of my interactions, not that they were bad initially, but until they found out, some gentlemen found out I worked for this specific brand, weren't really interested in talking to me.
Yep.
And then, after someone might find out, I have access to resource,
right.
It's not like anything was malicious or anything. I think it was just, it's subconscious. And I think a lot of, our fellow makers need to stand up for that. And in terms of like brand being a role model, we certainly won't claim to be perfect, but we definitely want to have an impact and support and give back. I think there is, and whether we do that through small projects like these, Avid CNC paid for all the materials for my Ori Gallery planter box project, if they're just here, they're here to help support that, whether it's a small project like with Shar, she really wanted to make these take and make kits, and so trying to solve the problem of like, okay, I reach out to Shar, I'm like, hey, what are the problems you're trying to solve right now that I can support you in? And she's like, well, the makerspace is closed or it has limited hours, and we need to get a way for people to make things at home. And so this take and make project is a good way, so they can pick up the kit, they can take it home, and they can make it. And I'm like, okay, well, perfect. Let's like CNC some kits and I'll mail them to you and you can distribute them to your community. So it's about, whether it's about, having a machine, access to a machine, or if it's just like, I can help cut these parts that can help you with a very specific goal you're trying to accomplish. To me, they think that's, I think what Avid CNC is trying to do is like, we need to ask the folks who are trying to help what they specifically need help with, because just having a machine in a makerspace might not necessarily be the right solution. Sometimes we've all been to a makerspace that maybe has a machine, 3D, whatever kind of machine it is, that's sitting in a corner not being used because somebody doesn't know how to use it, or because they weren't supported in the way that they needed to be in order to learn how to use something, whether or not it's a milling machine or a standing mill or whatever it is, we need to ask those women and those communities exactly what they need, and then make sure you can follow through with that, or finding a solution, or putting them in touch with somebody else who can help solve that problem. I think that's kind of what I've been trying to do, is try to reach out and see what I can help support, and how I can best utilize the skill sets that I have there.
Absolutely. Sammy, I cannot believe it, but we are like right at, like we're in that hour moment. And we didn't even get into like your personal making. So I'm going to apologize for that.
I'm sure we could talk about making things all day. I mean, that's what conferences are for and stuff. That's right. But yeah, thank you so much for having me, Katie. I had such a nice time talking to you, and I'm like, I could sit here for a couple more hours. But I know. Another time, next time.
That's right. Exactly. Yeah. Well, though, Sammy, I want to make sure you get a chance, though, to shout out yourself and where people can find your work and follow along with you outside of Avid. If people follow Avid CNC, they can find you there too. But your personal stuff, give you a chance to shout that out so people can find you.
Right. You can find me at Go Sami Lee, GOSAMILEE. That's my Instagram. I run the Avid YouTube and Instagram channels, so you can find us there too. If you're interested in digital fabrication, feel free to reach out, and I'm excited to, get to be a part of this wonderful list of women and non-binary makers that you talk to. I'm just so honored. So thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And be looking forward to, or not maybe forward, but be looking for me to be reaching out, because schooling wise, I went to school for manufacturing technology. And so like I learned, like G code and all that kind of stuff on like big CNCs. And that's where,
oh man, I could nerd out about this. Okay, keep going. Sorry.
And that's where my job takes me, is into like fab shops. Obviously it's all metal fabrication.
Right.
I am one of those people that still geeks out and loves the smell of like machine oil when I walk into those places and they're machining stuff. But yes, I have so many ideas for utilizing, more fabrication to help bring design to people. So be looking for.
All right, let's do it. Let's do it. Whatever it is. Yes, I'm there.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thanks so much, Sammy. Really do appreciate you taking the time to chat with me.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yes. All right. So again, that was Sammy of Go Sami Lee. And also the behind the scenes of all the social media for Avid CNC. I'll include the links to follow along with her on both of those accounts, Instagram, website, all of that, in the show notes for this week's episode. Probably the easiest and best way to find those show notes is just within whatever app you are following along with the podcast in. You can go down below and see the links. Now, if you are enjoying the podcast, I would really appreciate if whatever platform you are either listening to or watching this podcast on, that you hit that subscribe button. Head to iTunes, leave a 5-star review, or if you're in YouTube, leave a comment down below. All of that helps the algorithms across all of the apps let people know that this is a podcast people enjoy listening or watching, and pushes it out to more people. Also, feel free to share your favorite episode across social media. Say, shout out your favorite Maker Mom or Wonder Women series interview. Shout them out. Let people know that some awesome makers are featured on this podcast. If you would like to support the podcast in a more formal and ongoing manner, please consider checking out the tribe over on Patreon. That's just patreon.com/MakerMomPodcast. There's several different tiers that you can join over there. A $1, $3, $5 tier level gets you access to any additional content, plus gives you different merchandise depending on what level you choose. And then there is a brand new $30 a month tier level that makes you an official sponsor of the podcast. Now, those are limited. In fact, I'm down to just one spot of those being available. So if this is something you think you might be interested in, then you might want to jump on it pretty quick. All right. Again, that makes you an official sponsor of the podcast, which means you get your very own ad spot for each and every episode, each and every week. Okay. So at a minimum, you're doing 8 episodes a week. All right, and then if you just want to flat out buy some merchandise, like a sticker or a t-shirt, hit me up with a direct message, either at Maker Mom Podcast on Instagram or at Freeman Furnishings, and let me know that you want some merchandise, and we'll work out how to get that to you. All right. Now, when I'm not making a podcast, which seems like I'm doing a lot these days with 2 episodes a week, but when I'm not interviewing guests and making podcast episodes, you can find me designing and making furniture and home decor for bold homes over at freemanfurnishings.com or at Freeman Furnishings across all of the social media platforms, being YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn even. So just search for Freeman Furnishings on any of those platforms and you can find me, and you can see what I'm up to. Probably the most active on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, but still, you can check those out. All right, it is the middle of the week. It is hump day. We have made it to hump day, thank goodness, and the end of the week is in sight. I hope that the rest of this week brings you some making time, family time, whatever thing floats your boat, I guess, whatever you enjoy doing. I hope you get out in the shop and make, and I will see you next week.